Ukraine struck Crimea and Taganrog with Neptun missiles and Bars attack drones. A Russian aircraft factory is on fire. The situation at the front is critical. Russian forces have entrenched themselves in Pokrovsk and are trying to encircle Myrnohrad. Putin is preparing to mobilize another 1 million people in 2026, and young women are being urged to start having children as early as 18. Secret negotiations between the US and Russia in Abu Dhabi. How? The Kremlin has responded to the new plan to end the war. Czech scandal: the company Reactive drone defrauded the Ukrainian armed forces of nearly 700 million crowns by selling drones at 20 times their actual price. 76% of Trump voters support sanctions against Russia, and 72% are in favor of selling Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Hello, my name is Yulia Kokan, and right now here are the top stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you here on YouTube. Ukraine's defense forces struck Russian strategic targets with Neptun missiles and Bars attack drones. In Taganrog, on the night of November 25th, there was a massive fire after an impact.
Yes, a plane crashed into it.
There were explosions there for a long time. It was later revealed that the aviation plant in Taganrog was on fire. According to official information from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in Taganrog-Rostov region, the Tanteke-Beriev aircraft repair plant was hit, as well as the Molnia unmanned aerial vehicle manufacturing enterprise Atlant Aero.
During the strike on the Tanteke-Beriev plant, the experimental A-60 aircraft was likely damaged. This enterprise also carries out repairs and modernization of A-50 AWACS aircraft and Russian strategic bombers Tu-95MS.
By the way, about $270 million were allocated by the Russian government for the modernization of 6 Tu-95 aircraft. It was also a restless night in occupied Sevastopol. And now this is Gelendzhik. There, the glorious Russian air defense struck a residential building. She
is already flying high. She's roaring.
In Novorossiysk, according to preliminary data from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, a successful strike was carried out on the Sheskari's oil terminal, as well as on the Tuapse oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar region. According to
preliminary information, in Novorossiysk, oil standers, devices for loading and unloading oil to tankers, and a launcher from the S-400 air defense system were hit.
In addition, sources from the Security Service of Ukraine reported that during the attack on the port of Novorossiysk, a large landing ship was damaged. This is a Project 1171 vessel, which was docked at the naval base at the time of the strike. It is also known that during the night attack in Novorossiysk, someone hacked the alert system. A chemical attack was announced in the city. Through loudspeakers, Russians were urged to gather food, belongings, and to take iodine as a precaution against radiation exposure. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such sensible viewers. Let us know in the comments below which country you're watching from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And now let's continue. The most interesting part is coming up. And now to the main topic, the situation at the front. Russian troops are planning in the near future to cut off the land connection between Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk and encircle the city by advancing toward the settlements of Rovne and Svetlo. This was reported by the 7th Air Assault Corps.
In the northeast of Myrnohrad, the 38th Separate Marine Brigade captured 4 Russian occupiers who were attempting to storm the city. 3 of those detained are former convicts. Before the assault, they spent 4 days living in the basement of a building in a neighboring settlement. The assault troops were not provided with either food or water.
Also, according to Ukrainian servicemen with the call sign Mukhnoi, the Russians are entrenching themselves in certain areas of Pokrovsk.
The claim that the security service cleared the center of Pokrovsk is just nonsense for teenagers. The Russians didn't just wander in there for no reason. They dug in thoroughly, establishing positions in buildings. The situation in Myrnohrad is even more frightening. The high-rise buildings there are simply collapsing. They're not given any chance to survive. Russia is just demolishing everything in its path. They've switched to a mode of leveling the city to the ground without fighting. A serviceman with the call sign Muknoi. Oh.
The rapid pace of the enemy's advance is also being reported by the deputy commander of the 3rd Army Corps, Maxim Zhorin.
In some areas, if urgent changes are not made, the situation will become critical. Honestly, I can't remember the enemy advancing this quickly in a long time. Right now, the issue isn't about losing certain settlements, but about the enemy's overall significant improvement in operational positions across entire directions. Maxim Zhorin, deputy commander of the 3rd Army Corps.
But over time, the situation could become even more acute. Russia plans to mobilize at least 1 million servicemen in 2026. And that's 3 times more than what's needed to make up for annual losses. This statement was made by Alexander Kovalenko, military political observer of the Information Resistance Group.
Voluntary mobilization continues and decisions are being made regarding reservists. Next year, a number of laws will be adopted that will significantly restrict rights but expand the functions of conscripts. And all of this indicates that Russia intends to gather more than 1 million human resources next year. And
these are already the shots of a Ukrainian assault group entering from the western part of Pokrovsk. Russian soldiers also managed to heroically report on the clearing of Kostiantynivka in the Donetsk region. That's why, especially for them, a Ukrainian serviceman in Kostiantynivka itself refuted everything.
Anyone who has been to Kostiantynivka knows where I am right now.
I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge everyone to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you don't have the means to support them financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us. And now let's move on to the peace negotiations. As we reported earlier, the 28-point US peace plan was shortened. But according to a member of the Ukrainian delegation, advisor to the head of the president's office, Oleksandr Bevs, much more was done in Geneva.
Some parts of the plan were rewritten, others were changed. Not a single comment from the Ukrainian side was left without a response.
According to the Financial Times, the peace plan now consists of 19 points. This was essentially confirmed by President Zelensky, who stated, and I quote, "Now the list of necessary steps to end the war can become
workable." Now the list of necessary steps to end the war can become workable. At this point after Geneva, there are fewer points, no longer 28, and many have been properly addressed within this framework. There is still work for all of us to do together. It's very difficult. To create a final document, everything must be done properly. And we appreciate that most of the world is ready to help us, and the American side is taking a constructive approach. In fact, meetings were held all day yesterday. It was a challenging and extremely detailed process. There were meetings all day yesterday. It was not just a difficult, but an extremely detailed task.
Meanwhile, Bloomberg reports that the peace plan has, in particular, removed the point about using frozen Russian assets for the reconstruction of Ukraine.
European officials expressed optimism that the latest draft of the text no longer mentions the use of about $100 billion in frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine's reconstruction efforts. The proposal stipulated that the US would receive 50% of the profits, and the unspent frozen assets would be directed to the American-Russian Investment Fund. And
a few more words about the negotiations. As reported by the media, they were tense, and the story about Merov's broken pen seems to be true. A member of the Ukrainian delegation, First Deputy Foreign Minister Serhiy Kyslytsya, said that the negotiations in Geneva were on the verge of collapse.
Serhiy Kyslytsya stated that the Americans were angered by the leak of the peace plan to the media a few days before the meeting and by the public debates about the origins of the first draft of the document. Earlier, the media reported that the 28-point peace plan might have been developed by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff together with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev with the involvement of President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Serhiy Kyslytsya reported that 2 hours of negotiations between U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio and the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, brought the delegation back to a normal dialogue.
But will the updated peace plan become the basis for a real end to the war? That question remains open because guess what? That's right, Russia, against the backdrop of discussions about the US peace plan and its European alternative. Putin's advisor, Yuri Ushakov, stated that the initial version of the US plan is quite acceptable to them, but the European one is not.
Many, and I would like to emphasize that I do not mean all, but indeed many of the provisions and specific elements of this particular plan seem, in our view, quite acceptable and reasonable to us. We have already learned about the European plan, which at first glance is completely unconstructive and unsuitable for any practical purpose whatsoever, and frankly appears to offer no constructive value or usefulness at all.
And a few more words about Russia. According to Western media, Dan Driscoll, the U.S. Secretary of the Army, did indeed meet with the Russians.
According to the publication, Driscoll has already held one meeting with the Russians on the evening of November 24th. He is also expected to meet with them on Tuesday, November 25th. According to
Axios reports that during the negotiations in Abu Dhabi, a Ukrainian team led by the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kiriilo Budanov, also joined the American and Russian delegations. According to the Financial Times, Kyiv agreed to limit the size of its army to 800,000 personnel. The latest peace plan is less favorable for Moscow, leaving the most sensitive issues to the discretion of Trump and Zelensky. Among these are territorial issues and security guarantees from the United States. Earlier, Minister Lavrov stated that Russia had received the so-called Trump plan, but through unofficial channels. He also accused the West of attempting to rewrite the plan and undermine efforts to resolve the war. We
have it, but only through unofficial channels. It has not been officially handed over to us. But we are, of course, as the President said, ready to discuss specific wording, because there are certainly a number of issues there that need clarification.
At the same time, another meeting announced by the publication, namely negotiations between Zelensky and Trump, is in question. Suspilne, citing sources in the White House, writes that no meeting at the White House is scheduled for this week. At the same time, the Financial Times reports that part of Zelensky's entourage is concerned that the next meeting in Washington could repeat the scenario from February.
There are two camps. One believes that Zelensky should go to Washington to discuss this issue with Trump in person. The other fears that something might not go as planned and could lead to a serious setback.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron stated that after the signing of a peace agreement, support forces could be deployed in Ukraine, but not on the front lines, rather, for example, in Kyiv or even Odessa. These forces would include military personnel from the United Kingdom, France and Turkey, who would train the Ukrainian armed forces and guarantee the security of our country. This will be a joint coalition of more than 20 countries ready to help Ukraine.
There are British, French, and Turkish soldiers who, on the day the peace is signed, that is, not in a military context, will be there conducting training and security operations just as we do in some countries on NATO's eastern flank. This will be a different situation because it is not NATO, it is an intergovernmental coalition. But we already have about 20 countries that have declared they are ready to act actively, whether in the air, on land, or at sea.
But in any case, these negotiations are necessary, so we will keep an eye on how things develop. 6 Russian drones entered Moldova during a massive attack on Ukraine on the night of November 25th. The first drone was recorded between the settlements of Vinogradovka and Vulstanește, then flew towards Romania at an altitude of about 1,500 meters. 5 more drones crossed the airspace near the cities of Dondușeni and Argev, Bender, Vadului Vode and Floresti. One of them fell onto the roof of a house in the village of Cuhurești de Jos, Floresti district. Residents were evacuated, and the perimeter around the incident site was cordoned off by the police. The origin of the drone is still unknown. The investigation is ongoing, police noted. However, social media users claimed that it was a Russian Gerber drone with a Z on its tail. And then, as you might have guessed, no one shot down the drones and they calmly flew toward the Romanian border. The Romanian Ministry of Defense confirmed that on the morning of November 25th, Romanian radars detected a target moving toward Romanian airspace near Tulcea County. 2 German Eurofighter Typhoon jets were even scrambled from the airbase to monitor the situation. For his part, the country's Minister of Defense, Ionuț Maștanu, reported that a Russian drone without a warhead was discovered in Vaslui County, which borders Moldova's western border. According to him, the pilots had permission to open fire, but refrained due to the high risk of collateral damage. Maștanu is urgently returning to Bucharest to coordinate further actions and notes that the country will soon receive additional capabilities. Air defense. Well, personally, I'm not surprised. As usual, everyone is alarmed, the drones aren't being shot down, and no one knows whose they are. And what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, the West is preparing for war with Russia. In particular, Poland already realizes that Putin's march on Warsaw is quite real. At the same time, a number of high-profile statements are also being made in Britain and France. Our journalists know all the details.
War between Western countries and Russia is becoming increasingly likely.
As I analyze the facts, I come to the conclusion that war between Europe and Russia is becoming increasingly apparent. This is not an empty rumor. Everyone is preparing for it.
The buildup of military equipment, strengthening of borders, and increase in defense budgets. All of this is to confront the Kremlin in a few years.
In 3 to 4 years, we may face a kind of test of our resilience. It is already manifesting in hybrid forms, but it could become much harsher.
For now, all Russia is capable of is testing the patience of NATO countries. This includes, for example, so-called accidental incursions of Russian drones into various countries, including Poland. After the recent sabotage of the railway, Polish authorities announced the launch of a new operation, Horizon, to protect critical infrastructure from sabotage.
Most likely this only concerns storage facilities from the territories of Ukraine and Belarus, most likely, so not more than that. But again, 10,000 people, what does that mean? Well, that's not much, it's a very small number. Our entire border service is about 40,000 people.
As part of the operation, Poland plans to use not only manpower but also military equipment, mobile security systems, and reconnaissance complexes.
These crossings, additional personnel for guarding infrastructure facilities, training in first aid, tactical medicine, all of this is relevant. This really should have been done about 2 years ago. Only now are they getting around to it. It's good that it's only happening now. This is the country in the entire alliance that spends the most money on purchasing all kinds of weaponry. In other words, over the past few years, they have really made a big leap in purchasing all kinds of weaponry, American, European, even South Korean.
Warsaw has also launched a program to train citizens in basic safety skills from first aid to actions in emergency situations.
The Baltic countries have long been living in this mode. They've been studying tactical medicine and drones for quite some time. Apparently things aren't working out for them. But again, this is a typical story that should be the case for all countries that understand and feel that sooner or later the Russian Federation will come to them.
As for Britain and France, they've already decided exactly which units will be sent to Ukraine. But what is clear is that this will happen after a peace agreement.
Their numbers will be minimal. That is, we're probably talking about 10 to 15,000 people from each country. But again, that's a very small number. Very small, they won't be able to do anything. We have an active front line with the Russian Federation, 1,250 kilometers. 1,250? For a peacekeeping mission, that number is definitely not enough.
Nevertheless, any military preparations by the West are not exactly to the Kremlin's liking.
They are forcing themselves to further increase their military budgets. Some countries like Poland have already brought theirs up to almost 5%. Other countries are following this path, even though it is destroying their economies.
But the main question is how ready European countries really are to confront the Kremlin at this point, and how much more time they need to prepare.
They told me that they need at least another 2 years just to get their army into some kind of order. At least 2 years. Ideally 5 years. Ideally 5 to 7 years, at least 2, but not less than 2. Because it's not just about shells, not just about tanks. It's clear that it's about money, appropriations, placing orders, and starting to assemble equipment. It's about people.
From time to time, NATO countries openly showcase new types of weaponry, reminding the Kremlin of their capabilities.
Turkey has unveiled its first unmanned fighter jet, the Bayraktar Kizilelma, which is now equipped with national weaponry. The United States is launching the development of a new fighter jet, the F-47. According to Trump, the F-47 will feature a new level of stealth.
And Germany is even preparing Bundeswehr soldiers to practice actions in the event of the worst-case scenario.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Europe is gradually ramping up its preparations and strengthening its defenses. This situation is clearly not in the Kremlin's favor because at any moment Russia could face an unexpected pushback.
A scandal involving a Czech company that sold drones to the Ukrainian armed forces at 20 times the normal price. We're talking about the company Reactive Drone.
Specifically, over 2 years, it purchased drones for about 36 million crowns and sold them to the Ukrainian army for 692 million crowns. That's $28 million.
According to the police, the company did not want to pay profit tax and transferred most of the money, specifically 638 million crowns, to Chinese accounts.
Given that hundreds of millions of crowns have been seized, the losses caused to the state budget will be fully compensated.
The head of the company has been taken into custody, but his accomplice, the accountant, remains under investigation while at liberty. What do you think of this kind of business built on blood? Write in the comments what you think about this. Turkey stands with Ukraine. President Erdogan declares that Crimea is Ukraine and that his country has become a logistics and energy hub for Ukraine and its partners bypassing Russia. Details in the report.
The end of relations between Turkey and Russia. Ankara has reaffirmed its support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and its readiness to help restore the country after the war. Turkish President Recep Erdogan stated this during a joint briefing with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
We have once again reaffirmed our commitment to the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of our strategic partner, Ukraine. At the same time, we, Turkey, are always ready to discuss with Russia any proposals that would speed up a ceasefire and pave the way for a just and lasting peace.
In response, Volodymyr Zelensky emphasizes that Turkey is becoming a key partner not only in matters of security, but also in the restoration of prisoner exchanges, a process that Ukraine hopes to restart before the end of the year.
Right now, many processes have been set in motion, and we are trying to ensure that all this activity is directed toward peace, toward a dignified peace and guaranteed security.
If you look at Turkish policy, it has always been aimed at its own interests, both in relation to Ukraine and in relation to Russia. That is, after all, Turkey isn't refusing to trade with the Russian Federation. They do everything that serves their interests. Of course, right now we are entering Turkey's sphere of interest. They are supporting us to a certain extent. They are supporting us. Turkey's policy very clearly reflects this entire 1,000-year-old Eastern approach, very calculated, very competent, where first and foremost their own interests, especially economic ones, always come first.
However, there is still a certain tension lingering in the relationship between Russia and Turkey. Russian tourists found themselves stranded on board the Astoria Grande cruise liner off the coast of Turkey. In Istanbul, the vessel was denied permission to enter the port. There were more than 600 people on board, residents of Krasnodar Krai, Moscow, and Leningrad Oblast, who had purchased a 2-week cruise costing about $3,000. The liner was supposed to call at Marmaris, Antalya, Bodrum, and Izmir. Earlier, a similar situation occurred with the Sebrik ferry, which was supposed to restore cargo and passenger service between Trabzon and Sochi after a 14-year hiatus. Upon arriving in Sochi, the vessel was unable to dock and return to Turkey. Russian authorities explained the refusal by citing the alleged technical unpreparedness of the ports and the inability to ensure the safe reception of vessels. In Rozmi, this is already being called Turkey's response to the actions of the Russian authorities. They say that restricting transportation links is becoming a tool of pressure and an indicator of Turkey shifting towards supporting Ukraine and limiting Russia's capabilities in the Black Sea.
Turkey is also an important logistics hub for Russia. After all, we must not forget that both the oil pipelines and gas pipelines that pass through Turkish territory primarily supply gas and oil from Russia. So the Turks, that is the Turkish side, serves as a central hub, not only for Ukraine, but also, and most importantly, as the single most important and the only hub for Russia.
Meanwhile, Erdogan held a phone conversation with the Russian dictator. According to the Kremlin, the two sides discussed bilateral relations, the war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as regional and global issues. Putin allegedly confirmed the Russian side's interest in resolving the conflict through political and diplomatic means.
An exchange of views was held on the situation around Ukraine, including in the context of the American proposals for a peaceful settlement. Vladimir Putin noted that these proposals, in the version we have reviewed, are in line with the discussions at the Russian-American summit in Alaska and, in principle, could serve as a basis for a final peaceful settlement, according to the Kremlin.
President Erdogan, for his part, stated Turkey's readiness to continue efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace and to participate in any diplomatic initiatives that would facilitate direct dialogue between the parties.
Turkey is ready, as before, to contribute to all diplomatic initiatives and plans that will promote direct contacts between the parties and pave the way for lasting peace in our region. according to the Communications Directorate of the Republic of Turkey.
Although Ankara seeks to maintain its role as a mediator in Russian-Ukrainian relations, its recent actions demonstrate an increasingly clear orientation toward international law and support for Ukrainian sovereignty. The majority of Trump voters support aid to Ukraine and are against it losing its territories. At the same time, 83% want the American side to maintain its commitments to Ukraine and the European Union. This is evidenced by the results of a poll conducted by the Vandenberg Coalition.
The document states that 15% of surveyed voters want the US to completely stop supporting Ukraine. 76% of respondents said they support sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft on the export of Russian energy resources. And as many as 72% of Trump voters are convinced that the US should help Ukraine hold Russia accountable for the aggression of the Russian dictator Putin. At the same time, half of that percentage supports either sharing US intelligence with Ukraine or providing Tomahawk missiles. Interestingly, most respondents blame Putin for failing to secure a ceasefire. Meanwhile, only 16% support the position of the aggressor country, according to which Ukraine should give up its territories. What do you think of these results? Do you share the views of Americans or not? Write your thoughts, don't hold back in the comments. The Mosfilm film studio is sponsoring Russia's war against Ukraine, purchasing drones, and has even handed over tanks to the occupiers. And this is happening at a time when the West has once again started flirting with representatives of the aggressor country's culture, opening doors for them at festivals and giving them awards. Even though in 2022, Russians became persona non grata in the world of culture. We will prove that Russian filmmakers have become direct accomplices in the war crimes committed by Putin's soldiers.
A staunch Putin supporter and frequent guest on Russian propaganda TV shows, director Karen Shakhnazarov has been actively defending the Kremlin's position since the so-called special military operation began.
Ukraine, essentially speaking, is just a transitional shot in that big, gigantic picture in which, in the grand scheme of things, it plays absolutely no role at all, in fact.
But it turns out that the head of Mosfilm not only supports the Russian army with words, but also with actions. Back in the previous year, Shakhnazarov admitted to Putin in the Kremlin that he was helping the occupying forces.
We provided charitable assistance totaling 8 million this year, including 6 million for the needs of the special military operation. By the way, in 2023, we handed over to the armed forces 28 T-55 tanks, 8 PT-76 tanks, 6 BMPs, and 8 tractors that we had stored at our military technical base. I found out that there were needs. I contacted the Ministry of Defense and they took these vehicles. Karen Shakhnazarov, head of Mosfilm.
Before the start of the full-scale invasion, purchases related to the military sector in Russia were effectively classified. And already in the fall of 2022, the Russian government, by special decree, allowed the regions, as a special economic measure, to purchase dual-use goods, drones, night vision devices, binoculars and scopes for mobilized troops using funds from local budgets and state institutions. From that moment, Mosfilm began collecting humanitarian aid for Russian soldiers, food, medicine. But in reality, the film studio headed by propagandist Shakhnazarov effectively became a front for purchasing Chinese drones and electronic warfare systems for the Russian military under the guise of humanitarian aid.
As follows from the Konto database. The point is, from June 2024 to October 2025 in Gubkino, the Mosfilm concern purchased Mavic T3 drones and various electronic warfare systems from different suppliers for a total of almost 6 million rubles. One might assume that the studio is buying drones for filming, but the drone specifications don't match up with that. We're not talking about the basic model, but the most expensive T3 version with a thermal imager. These drones cost between $5,000 and $7,000 each and are actively used by both Russian and Ukrainian military forces at the front, which has created a demand for invisibility cloaks that sometimes allow soldiers to be less visible to enemy UAVs at night. Radio Svoboda.
At a meeting with Putin, Shakhnazarov said that the Mosfilm film studio had provided charitable assistance for the needs of the special military operation in the exact amount of 6 million rubles. In addition to drones, the film studio purchased Bulat and ISL drone detectors, Romashka UAV jammers, as well as the Kapyushon electronic warfare station. But Shakhnazarov is driven not only by patriotism and love for Russia. The war in Ukraine is an excellent opportunity to make money.
Shakhnazarov, all his political nonsense that he's been spouting for many years on Russian television is simply an attempt to drown his shady, dark, corrupt, and criminal dealings in this pseudo-patriotic word salad. And that's why by the way, the more someone is involved in shady dealings, the more they try to present themselves as a die-hard patriot, because no one ever questions the die-hard patriots. No one is going to put Shakhnazarov up against the wall or check the financial documents of this Mosfilm. Shakhnazarov will immediately start yelling that it's some Banderites taking revenge on him for his die-hard patriotic activities.
At the end of August in Stavropol, a court sent 6 people to prison who were found guilty of fraud involving the procurement of humanitarian aid for the military through the region's state institutions. Perhaps the same fate will befall Shakhnazarov sooner or later. So far, the Propagandist director has only been included in the EU sanctions list related to actions that undermine or threaten the territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence of Ukraine. Mosfilm itself has so far managed to avoid Western sanctions, but after this investigation, it's only a matter of time.
And meanwhile, across the border, there's yet another cringe-worthy moment. In Russia, they've come up with a way to urgently fix the demographic crisis. Valentina Matvienko, chairwoman of the Federation Council of Russia, has called for making it the norm to have children immediately after turning 18. According to her, people should start having children right after reaching adulthood, instead of postponing it, as is currently the case, until 28 or 29 years old. In an interview with the newspaper Moskovsky Komsomolets, Matvienko stated that the country's demographic policy needs a change in mentality. A successful person, she said, should be considered someone who has a good, close-knit, large and strong family. According to her, having children should be fashionable. And she says that postponing childbirth is dangerous. In her opinion, medical and other obstacles may arise later on. In this context, she quoted a phrase from the Russian dictator Putin, saying that fatherhood, motherhood and children are happiness, and that this happiness should not be postponed. What do you think? Is it really true? Is Matvienko doing this out of concern for the Russian army? Or is there something else going on here? Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of our news? Let us know what we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, please like this video to support what we do, and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you soon.